My place card at my wife's work event said idiot trash. She and her boss held with laughter. There are moments in life that divide everything into two chapters. Before and after. For me, that moment wasn't a divorce. It wasn't a funeral. It wasn't a car accident. It was a small white place card sitting neatly on a round banquet table inside the most expensive hotel in the city. A card that carried my name. A card that should have welcomed me. Instead, it destroyed everything I believed about the woman I loved. But that moment didn't happen overnight. It started years earlier. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 42 years old. Most people would describe me as ordinary. I work as a maintenance supervisor for a manufacturing company. It's honest work. It pays the bills. It isn't glamorous, but I've never measured success by the size of my paycheck. I measure it by whether I can look at myself in the mirror every morning. For 15 years, I believed I had built a life worth being proud of. A small house in a quiet neighborhood, a dependable truck, friends who knew they could count on me, and a wife I loved with everything I had. Emily. If you met her, you'd understand why everyone admired her. She was intelligent, confident, beautiful without trying. The kind of woman who could walk into a room and naturally become the center of attention. When we met, neither of us had much. She worked as a receptionist. I worked nights repairing industrial equipment. Our first apartment was so tiny that our dining table doubled as a desk. The air conditioner barely worked. The kitchen sink leaked every week. But we laughed constantly. Those were the happiest years of my life. Every Friday, we buy cheap takeout, sit on the floor, and dream about the future. Emily wanted to become an executive. She wanted to wear designer suits, lead meetings, travel for business, build something important. I believe in her dreams, even more than she did. One day, I told her, people will know your name. She would smile and squeeze my hand. And when they do, she'd whisper, it'll be because you never stopped believing in me. I believed every word. When she decided to earn her MBA, money became a problem. Tuition wasn't cheap. Neither were books. We couldn't afford both school and our normal expenses. So I worked overtime, weekends, night shifts, holiday shifts. Sometimes I went nearly 3 weeks without taking a single day off. Emily would apologize. You don't have to do all this. I'd kiss her forehead. Yes, I do. Because that's what husbands do. At least, that's what I believed. One winter, her laptop died the week before final exams. She was devastated. I'll fail if I can't finish my project. The next morning, I sold the only thing my late father had left me. His restored 1969 motorcycle. It had been my greatest treasure. The buyer handed me the cash. I smiled, then cried inside my truck after driving away. Emily hugged me when I surprised her with a brand new laptop. She cried, I'll never forget this. Those words stayed with me for years. I wish they had been true. 5 years later, everything changed. Emily graduated at the top of her class. Within months, she landed a management position at one of the fastest-growing marketing firms in the state. She was brilliant. Her promotions came quickly. Manager, senior manager, director, vice president. Every promotion felt like a victory for both of us. Whenever someone congratulated her, I proudly said the same thing. She earned every bit of it. I meant it. People assumed I felt intimidated by her success. I never did. I celebrated it. If she came home after midnight because of a big presentation, dinner was waiting. If she needed quiet to prepare for a meeting, I left the television off. If she forgot lunch, I'd drive across town just to bring it to her. She thanked me less often than she used to, but I assumed she was simply busy. Success changes schedules. I didn't realize it can also change people. About 2 years before the gala, little things began to feel different. Emily started protecting her phone. She used to leave it on the kitchen counter. Now it never left her hand. She changed the password. She tilted the screen away whenever I walked by. When I asked about work, her answers became shorter. Fine. Busy. You wouldn't understand. That last sentence hurt more than she realized. Not because I needed to understand marketing, but because I had spent years understanding her. Or at least I thought I had. Business trips became more frequent. Weekend meetings appeared out of nowhere. She bought expensive dresses, luxury handbags, perfume she never wore around me. One evening I joked, Trying to impress your CEO? She laughed. You really are funny. Then she immediately changed the subject. I should have noticed. I should have asked more questions. Instead, I trusted my wife. Trust isn't blindness. It's a choice. And I chose it every single day. One Thursday evening, Emily walked into the kitchen with unusual excitement. I was stirring a pot of spaghetti sauce. She placed her purse on the counter. Guess what? What? Our company's annual leadership gala is Saturday. Congratulations. She smiled. They're allowing spouses this year. I looked at her. Really? Yes. There was a tiny pause, barely noticeable. Then she added, I'd like you to come. Those words made me happier than they should have. Emily almost never invited me to corporate events. She always claimed they were boring. This one is different, she said. Our CEO wants families there. Then I'd love to come. She smiled, but something about it seemed forced. I ignored the feeling. The next day, I took time off work. Not because I needed to, because I wanted to look my best. I bought my first new suit in almost 8 years. Dark navy. Simple. Elegant. The tailor adjusted the sleeves while saying, Special occasion? My wife's company gala. He smiled. You must be proud. I am. More than words could explain. On the drive home, I stopped at a florist. Emily loved white lilies. I bought a bouquet just because. When I handed them to her that evening, she looked surprised. What's the occasion? I don't need one. She thanked me, but her eyes drifted back to her phone before I even sat down. Something inside me quietly sank. Saturday finally arrived. Emily spent nearly 2 hours getting ready. Professional makeup, diamond earrings, a black evening gown that looked like it belonged on a magazine cover. She looked stunning. You look beautiful, I said honestly. Thanks. That was all. No compliment in return. No smile. No kiss. Just, thanks. I told myself not to overthink it. She was probably nervous about hosting executives. The hotel was breathtaking. Valets hurried between luxury cars. Crystal chandeliers sparkled through enormous glass windows. Live piano music drifted across the marble lobby. Everywhere I looked, people wore designer suits worth more than my monthly paycheck. I suddenly felt out of place. Emily noticed. She leaned closer. Relax. I'm trying. They're just people. I smiled. I know. But deep down, I wasn't worried about them judging me. I was worried about embarrassing her. Looking back, the irony still hurts. We walked toward the registration desk. A cheerful young employee greeted us. Good evening. Welcome to the Hamilton Leadership Gala. Emily gave her name. The receptionist found it immediately. Vice President Emily Carter. She handed Emily an elegant envelope. Then she searched for mine. Her smile slowly disappeared. She frowned at the computer screen, looked toward another employee. The other woman walked over. Both stared at the monitor. Then, the second employee quietly whispered something. The first nodded. She reached beneath the desk, picked up another envelope. Her hands hesitated before giving it to me. For just a moment, I could have sworn she looked embarrassed. Enjoy your evening, she said softly. Emily immediately turned toward the ballroom. Come on. I slipped the envelope into my jacket without opening it. I assumed it contained my seating assignment. Nothing more. Nothing less. If only I had looked right then. Maybe we would have walked away. Maybe I would have spared myself what happened next. But I didn't. I followed my wife through the grand ballroom, completely unaware that my name had already become the evening's biggest joke. The place card. The ballroom was breathtaking. Hundreds of warm lights reflected off crystal chandeliers, making the entire room glow like something from a movie. A live jazz band played softly near the stage, while waiters moved gracefully between tables carrying silver trays filled with champagne and elegant appetizers. People laughed. Business partners shook hands. Executives exchanged compliments. It looked like the perfect evening. I had no idea I was about to become the night's entertainment. Emily walked confidently beside me, greeting coworkers with polished smiles. Emily! So glad you made it. You look amazing. Everyone seemed happy to see her. She introduced me to a few people. This is my husband, Daniel. Most smiled politely before turning their attention back to her. I didn't mind. Tonight was about celebrating her achievements. Or so I thought. A hostess approached us. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter, your table is ready." She pointed toward the center of the ballroom. As we walked over, I finally pulled the white envelope from my jacket. Inside was a beautifully printed seating card, elegant gold lettering, thick white cardstock. I smiled, expecting to see Daniel Carter. Instead, my smile disappeared. Printed beneath my name were 2 words: idiot trash. I blinked. Surely I was reading it wrong. I turned the card over. Nothing. I looked again. The words hadn't changed. Idiot trash. For a few seconds, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. There had to be some mistake. A printing error. A joke meant for someone else. My hand suddenly felt cold. "What is it?" Emily asked. Without speaking, I handed her the card. She looked down. For one brief moment, her face showed surprise. Then, she laughed. Not an awkward chuckle. Not nervous laughter. A real laugh. The kind that comes from someone who finds something genuinely funny. Before I could say a word, another voice joined hers. "Well," a man said behind us, "I see they actually used it." Emily laughed even harder. I slowly turned around. Standing there was her boss. Tall, expensively dressed, perfectly groomed. His company badge identified him as Richard Lawson, Senior Executive Vice President. He held a glass of champagne in one hand. A wide grin stretched across his face. "You should have seen your expression," Richard said, barely containing his laughter. Several people standing nearby overheard him. A few smiled awkwardly. Others looked down at the floor. Nobody said a word. I looked back at Emily. "You knew." She wiped tears of laughter from her eyes. "Oh, Daniel. It was supposed to be harmless." "Harmless?" I stared at the card in my hand. "You thought humiliating me in front of hundreds of people was harmless?" Richard shrugged. "Lighten up. It's just office humor." Office humor. I felt every pair of nearby eyes drifting toward us. Conversation slowed. People pretended not to watch. But they were watching. Every single one of them. One woman near the table looked genuinely uncomfortable. Another quietly whispered something to her husband. Someone else pulled out a phone before another guest gently lowered it. Even they knew this had gone too far. I looked at Emily again. "I asked you 3 times this week if you wanted me here." She avoided my eyes. "You insisted." "I thought." My voice cracked. "I thought you were proud of me." For the first time that evening. She didn't answer. Richard stepped forward. "Oh, don't be dramatic. You should learn to laugh at yourself." I looked directly into his eyes. "I've never even met you." "You haven't." He took a sip of champagne. "But I've certainly heard plenty about you." Those words hit harder than the card. Emily had been talking about me. At work. To her boss. Behind my back. "What exactly have you heard?" I asked quietly. Richard smirked. "Oh." He glanced toward Emily. "You didn't tell him?" Emily's face suddenly lost its color. "Richard." "It's fine," he interrupted. "He deserves to know." For the first time all night, Emily looked nervous. Very nervous. My stomach tightened. Something was terribly wrong. Something much bigger than a cruel joke. I folded the place card and slipped it into my pocket. I think," I said calmly, "it's time someone started telling the truth." The smile slowly disappeared from Richard's face. Emily whispered my name. "Daniel!" But I was no longer listening. Because in that moment, the embarrassment was gone. It had been replaced by something much colder. Questions. Questions that demanded answers. And before this night was over, I was determined to find them. The first crack in the truth. I stood there in the middle of the ballroom, surrounded by music, laughter, and conversations that suddenly sounded miles away. The folded place card felt heavy in my pocket. 2 words. Idiot trash. That was all it had taken to turn 15 years of marriage into a question mark. Emily reached for my arm. "Daniel, please. Let's not make a scene." I slowly pulled my arm away. "A scene?" I asked quietly. "You and your boss humiliated me in front of half your company. It was just a joke." I looked directly into her eyes. "I don't recognize you anymore." For the first time that evening, she had no response. Richard cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, dinner will begin in a few minutes." He smiled as though nothing had happened. People slowly returned to their conversations, but I noticed something important. Several employees looked uncomfortable. A few avoided making eye contact with me altogether. One young man actually mouthed the words, "I'm sorry," before walking away. Not everyone thought the joke was funny. That mattered. Emily leaned closer. "Can we just get through tonight?" I stared at her in disbelief. "You still expect me to sit here?" She sighed impatiently. "Daniel, you're making this bigger than it is." I laughed once. Not because anything was funny. Because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I've spent 15 years protecting your dignity," I said. "You couldn't protect mine for 15 seconds. Without another word, I walked toward the bar. The bartender slid a glass of sparkling water in front of me. "You look like you could use something stronger," he joked. "I need a clear head." He nodded. "Smart choice." As I stood there, I watched the room through the mirrored shelves behind the bar. Emily was speaking with Richard. Neither of them looked amused anymore. Richard's smile had disappeared. He was speaking quickly, almost urgently. Emily kept glancing toward me. Then something strange happened. Richard handed her his phone. She read something on the screen. Her face turned pale. Whatever message she had just seen. It scared her. A few minutes later, someone sat on the empty stool beside me. It was the young employee who had silently apologized. He couldn't have been older than 26. He kept his voice low. "Mr. Carter?" "Yes." "My name's Ethan." He looked over his shoulder to make sure no one was listening. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." "For what?" "For tonight." "You knew." He hesitated. "I knew. Something was planned." My heartbeat quickened. "What do you mean?" "They've been joking about the seating cards all week." I stared at him. "They?" Ethan swallowed. "I shouldn't be talking." "Please." He looked genuinely conflicted. "I don't know exactly who came up with it, but people in the executive offices knew. And nobody stopped it." A cold feeling spread through my chest. This hadn't been a last-minute prank. It had been planned. Days in advance. Maybe longer. "Did Emily know?" Ethan looked at the floor. "I don't know." The hesitation answered my question better than words ever could. Before I could ask anything else, another employee called Ethan's name. He stood quickly. "I have to go." Then he leaned close enough that only I could hear him. "Be careful who you trust tonight." He disappeared into the crowd. Those 7 words stayed with me. Be careful who you trust tonight. Dinner was announced. Guests took their seats. I considered leaving. Every instinct told me to walk out. But another part of me needed answers. If I left now, I'd spend the rest of my life wondering. So I returned to our table. The replacement place card now simply read, Daniel Carter. Someone had quietly removed the insulting one, as though pretending it had never existed. I slipped into my chair without saying a word. Emily attempted a smile. "I'm glad you stayed. I haven't decided whether that's a good thing." Silence settled between us. Across the table, Richard entertained several executives with stories about company growth and record profits. Everyone laughed. Everyone except me. Every few minutes, I caught him looking in my direction. Not confidently. Nervously. That surprised me. If he truly believed this had been harmless, why was he suddenly worried? Halfway through dinner, Richard stood to deliver a speech. He thanked employees, celebrated company milestones, praised teamwork. Then he said something that caught my attention. "Our greatest strength has always been integrity." Integrity. The word echoed in my mind. A man who publicly humiliated someone's spouse was giving a speech about integrity. The irony was almost unbearable. The audience applauded. I noticed Ethan didn't. Neither did several others, seated near the back of the ballroom. Instead, they exchanged uneasy glances. Something wasn't right inside this company. And I was beginning to believe tonight's humiliation was only a symptom of a much bigger problem. As dessert was served, Emily's phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen and immediately stood. "I'll be right back." She hurried toward a hallway leading away from the ballroom. A few seconds later, Richard excused himself as well. He walked in the same direction. Not immediately, just long enough afterward to avoid attracting attention. Most people never noticed. I did. A strange feeling settled over me. Curiosity, suspicion, and a growing need to know the truth. I quietly pushed my chair back. No one seemed to notice. Keeping a respectful distance, I followed them into the hallway. Their voices echoed faintly from around the corner. I couldn't make out the words. But one thing was clear. Whatever conversation they were having, they didn't want anyone else to hear it. I took another careful step forward, then another. Just before I reached the corner, I heard Richard say one sentence that made my blood run cold. "We have to make sure he never finds out." I froze. Who was he? And what exactly wasn't I supposed to discover? Behind the closed door, I stopped breathing. Richard's voice echoed through the hallway. "We have to make sure he never finds out." For a moment, I wasn't even sure he was talking about me. Maybe there was another he. Maybe I was letting my emotions get the better of me. Then Emily answered, "He won't. Daniel trusts me." Those 5 words hit harder than the place card ever had. Not because they were cruel, because they were true. I had trusted her with everything. My heart, my future, my sacrifices, my loyalty. And now, that trust was being discussed like it was another business asset. I carefully moved closer until I reached the corner of the hallway. The conference room door was slightly open. Inside, Emily stood with her arms folded while Richard paced back and forth. Richard stopped beside the window. "Tonight almost got out of hand." Emily sighed. "I told you the joke was too much. You laughed." "I know. You didn't exactly defend him." Emily looked down at the floor. For the first time that evening, she looked ashamed. "I never thought he'd react like that." Richard gave a dry laugh. "He's tougher than he looks." Emily rubbed her forehead. "I don't want this becoming a problem." "It won't." Richard spoke with complete confidence. "He'll calm down. Men like Daniel always do." I clenched my jaw. He knew nothing about me. Nothing. Yet he spoke as though I were predictable. As though I were weak. As though humiliating me carried no consequences. Then Richard lowered his voice. "The important thing is the acquisition." Emily nodded slowly. "I know. Acquisition." That wasn't what I expected to hear. Richard continued, "If anyone starts asking questions before the board meeting, months of work could collapse." Emily looked nervous. "What about accounting?" "They've already signed the reports." "And Ethan?" Richard frowned. "I'll deal with Ethan." The name caught my attention immediately. Ethan. The young employee who had apologized to me. Why was Richard concerned about him? Emily hesitated. "He's a good kid. He's also asking too many questions." Silence filled the room. I felt my pulse quicken. Something was happening inside this company. Something much bigger than an insulting place card. And somehow, I had accidentally walked into the middle of it. Suddenly my phone vibrated. The sound was barely noticeable. But in the silent hallway, it was enough. Richard turned toward the door. "Did you hear that?" Emily looked up. "I think someone's outside." I stepped backward as quietly as I could. My heart pounded, so loudly I thought they might hear it. The conference room door opened. I ducked into a nearby corridor just as Richard stepped outside. He looked both directions. The hallway was empty. I remained perfectly still behind a decorative wall. After several tense seconds, he went back inside. Only then did I finally breathe again. I returned to the ballroom before either of them. No one seemed to notice I had been gone. I sat down and stared at the untouched dessert in front of me. A few minutes later, Emily returned. She offered a small smile. "You disappeared." "So did you." Her smile faded. "I had a work issue." "I'm sure you did." Neither of us said another word. Across the room, Ethan briefly made eye contact with me. He looked worried. Then he subtly motioned toward the exit. Just once. Almost impossible to notice. Almost. About 20 minutes later, the evening officially ended. Guests began collecting coats and saying their goodbyes. Emily was surrounded by coworkers. Richard stood near the entrance, shaking hands and thanking everyone for attending. I quietly walked outside. The cool night air felt like freedom. A voice called behind me, "Mr. Carter." I turned. It was Ethan. He looked over both shoulders before speaking. "I only have a minute." "What's going on?" He swallowed hard. "I can't explain everything." "Then explain what you can." He reached into his jacket. "I shouldn't be giving you this." He handed me a small sealed envelope. "No matter what happens, don't open it until you're home." I stared at it. "What is it?" "If anyone sees me talking to you, I could lose my job." "Ethan," he interrupted me. "Please, just promise me you'll read it." "I promise." He nodded once, then hurried across the parking lot without looking back. I stood there holding the envelope. It wasn't thick. Maybe 3 or 4 sheets of paper. Nothing more. Yet somehow, It felt heavier than anything I had ever carried. The drive home was almost completely silent. Emily looked out the passenger window. I kept both hands on the steering wheel. Streetlights passed one after another. Finally, she spoke. "I'm sorry about tonight." I kept my eyes on the road. "For the joke?" "Yes." "Or, because it didn't go the way you expected?" She didn't answer. After another minute, she quietly asked, "Are you angry?" I almost laughed. "No. I'm disappointed." She closed her eyes. That single sentence seemed to hurt her more than shouting ever could. Neither of us spoke again for the rest of the drive. When we arrived home, Emily went upstairs without another word. "I have an early meeting," she said from the hallway. Then the bedroom door closed. I remained downstairs. The house felt strangely unfamiliar, as though I were sitting in someone else's living room. After several minutes, I reached into my coat pocket. The envelope Ethan had given me was still there. My hands trembled slightly as I broke the seal. Inside were 3 photocopied pages. The first page appeared to be an internal company financial report. The second listed several transactions with handwritten notes in the margin. The third page contained a sticky note. Only one sentence had been written on it, in neat blue ink. "This isn't about the joke. They were trying to distract you. Start with Project Falcon." I read the sentence 3 times. Project Falcon? I had never heard those words before. But one thing was suddenly clear. The humiliation at the gala had not been the real story. It had been a distraction. And whatever Project Falcon was, someone inside that company believed it was important enough to risk everything to expose it. Project Falcon. I read the sticky note again. "This isn't about the joke. They were trying to distract you. Start with Project Falcon." The words didn't make sense. Why would anyone use a public humiliation to distract me? I wasn't an executive. I wasn't an investor. I didn't even work for the company. As far as I knew, I was just Emily's husband. Yet Ethan had risked his job to get those documents into my hands. There had to be a reason. I spread the papers across the kitchen table. The financial report was full of numbers, account codes, and payment records. Most of it looked like another boring corporate document. But several entries had been circled in red ink. The same vendor appeared over and over again. Falcon Strategic Solutions. The payments were unusually large. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Then millions. Every payment had been approved by the same 2 executives, Richard Lawson and Emily Carter. I frowned. Emily wasn't part of the finance department. Why was she approving contracts worth millions of dollars? Something didn't add up. I heard footsteps upstairs. Quickly, I gathered the papers and slipped them into a folder. A few seconds later, Emily walked into the kitchen wearing pajamas. She looked exhausted. "You aren't coming to bed?" "In a minute." She noticed the open laptop. "Working. Just paying bills." She nodded. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she surprised me. "I'm really sorry about tonight." I looked at her. This time, she sounded sincere. "I know saying I'm sorry doesn't erase what happened." "No, it doesn't." Tears formed in her eyes. "I should have stopped it. Why didn't you?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again. "I don't know." That answer told me everything. She knew it was wrong. She simply hadn't been willing to stand up to Richard. Or perhaps, there was another reason. She quietly returned upstairs. The bedroom door closed. I waited another 10 minutes before taking the folder back out. The next morning was Sunday. Emily left early, claiming she had an emergency meeting. On a Sunday, I watched her drive away. Then I picked up my phone. The first person I called wasn't a lawyer. It wasn't the police. It was Ethan. His phone rang several times before going to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. Instead, hice una simple text. "Thank you. We need to talk." 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Not on company phones. Library. Noon. Come alone. No signature. It didn't need one. The city library was nearly empty. Rain tapped softly against the windows as I walked inside. Ethan was already there, sitting in a quiet reading corner with a backpack beside him. He looked nervous. "You came. You said it was important." He glanced around before speaking. "Did you read everything?" "I did." "What is Project Falcon?" He took a deep breath. "It's supposed to be a confidential acquisition." "Supposed to be?" He nodded. "That's what everyone thinks." "And what do you think?" "I think it's something else. He leaned closer. Money has been disappearing for months. Millions of dollars. Hidden through fake consulting contracts. I stared at him. You're accusing your own company of fraud. I'm saying the numbers don't make sense. He opened his backpack and removed a notebook. I work in internal analytics. I compare budgets. I started noticing that the same companies kept getting paid, but nobody could explain what they actually did. He turned several pages. They don't have real offices. They barely have employees. Some don't even have functioning websites. Shell companies. The thought crossed my mind immediately. Ethan nodded as though he had read my mind. I think someone is moving money. But I can't prove it. Not yet. Why tell me? I asked. I'm nobody. He shook his head. No. You're the one person Richard underestimated. What do you mean? He thinks you're harmless. He thinks you'll walk away after the prank. But I watched you. You didn't yell. You didn't throw punches. You started asking questions. He smiled faintly. That's what scared him. I remembered Richard's expression after I confronted him. For the first time, it made sense. I need proof, I said. Not suspicions. I know. Ethan reached into his backpack again. This time he pulled out a flash drive. I copied everything I legally had access to. What about the rest? I couldn't get it. Only executives can. He hesitated, especially Emily. I looked down at the flash drive resting on the table. My wife's name. Again. Every answer seemed to lead back to her. Before I could ask another question, Ethan's phone vibrated. He looked at the screen. His face lost all color. I have to go. What happened? They know someone copied files. How? I don't know. He stood so quickly his chair nearly fell over. Daniel, if anything happens to me, don't trust Richard, and don't assume Emily knows everything. That last sentence caught me off guard. What does that mean? I can't explain now. He zipped up his backpack. They're already watching. Without another word, he hurried toward the exit. I watched him disappear into the rain. Something about the way he left made my stomach tighten. It felt like I had just spoken to someone who believed he was running out of time. That evening, I plugged the flash drive into my laptop. Hundreds of files appeared on the screen. Contracts, invoices, emails, meeting schedules. I opened the first folder. Nothing unusual. The second, routine reports. The third folder was password protected. Its title read, Falcon, Executive Access Only. Before I could try opening it, I heard the front door unlock. Emily was home. I pulled the flash drive from the laptop just as she walked into the living room. She looked unusually tense. Daniel, we need to talk. Her voice was quiet, almost fearful. I slowly stood. So do we. She stared at me for a long moment before speaking. Someone at work was fired today. My heart skipped a beat. Who? She swallowed hard. Ethan. The room fell silent. She continued in a trembling voice. They're accusing him of stealing confidential company files. I tightened my grip on the flash drive hidden inside my pocket. Ethan had been discovered, and if Richard learned where those files had gone, I wouldn't be the next target because of a joke. I'd become the next target because I was getting too close to the truth. The man who was watching. I didn't react. Not immediately. I simply looked at Emily as though the news had surprised me. Ethan, I asked quietly. She nodded. They escorted him out of the building this morning. What are they accusing him of? Stealing confidential company files. She walked into the kitchen, set her purse on the counter, and rubbed her temples. Everyone's talking about it. I watched her carefully. She looked tired, worried, but something else was there. Fear. Not the fear of losing a coworker. The fear of something much bigger. I feel bad for him, she whispered. They're saying he'll probably never work in this industry again. I wanted to tell her the truth. That Ethan wasn't a thief. That he had been trying to expose something. Instead, I simply nodded. What a shame. She studied my face, almost as if she were trying to decide whether I knew more than I was letting on. After a few long seconds, she forced a smile. I'm going to take a shower. The moment she disappeared upstairs, I reached into my pocket and took out the flash drive. If Ethan had risked everything to get this to me, I owed it to him to find out why. I opened my laptop again. The password-protected folder still sat there. Falcon, Executive Access Only. There had to be another way in. I searched through the other files instead. Most were ordinary. Expense reports, meeting agendas, vendor contracts. Then one spreadsheet caught my attention. The title was simple. Approved executive travel. I opened it. Richard's name appeared dozens of times. So did Emily's. At first nothing seemed unusual. Executives traveled all the time. Then I noticed something strange. Several trips listed Richard, and Emily as attending the same conferences. But the conference schedules attached to those files showed something odd. The meetings lasted one day. The hotel reservations lasted 4. Another report showed flights returning 2 days after the conferences had ended. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe not. I wasn't interested in jumping to conclusions. I needed facts, not assumptions. The following morning I went to work as usual. Machines hummed. Forklifts moved across the warehouse. People joked during coffee breaks. Everything looked normal. But my mind wasn't there. Around lunchtime my phone vibrated. Unknown number. Meet me. Same library. 3 o'clock. Come alone. No name. No explanation. I immediately knew who it was. Ethan. 3 o'clock arrived. The library looked even quieter than before. I searched every aisle. Nothing. Every reading table. Nothing. Just as I was about to leave, I noticed a folded newspaper sitting on a chair. My name was written across it. Inside was another handwritten note. They're following me. Don't wait. Locker 214. Bus station. No signature. My pulse quickened. This was no longer a conversation. It felt like instructions. The downtown bus station was crowded. Travelers hurried in every direction. I found locker 214. The key had already been left inside. I opened the door. There was no money. No documents. Only a small digital voice recorder. I slipped it into my jacket before anyone noticed. As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of a familiar face outside the station. A man in a dark gray suit. I recognized him immediately. He had been standing near Richard at the gala. Now he was watching the entrance, watching everyone who came and went, including me. The moment our eyes met, he reached for his phone. I didn't wait. I blended into the crowd and exited through a side entrance. By the time I reached my truck, my heart was pounding. Was I imagining things? Or had someone really been following me? That evening I sat alone in my garage with headphones plugged into the recorder. I pressed play. Static filled the room. Then Ethan's voice. If you're listening to this, something has probably gone wrong. He sounded exhausted. I don't know how much time I have. My grip tightened. I started investigating Falcon 6 months ago. I thought I had discovered accounting mistakes. I was wrong. It wasn't sloppy bookkeeping. It was deliberate. A long pause followed. Then Ethan continued. I can't prove where all the money went. But I found evidence that reports were being altered after board approval. There are only 3 people with that level of access. He slowly read the names. Richard Lawson. Chief Financial Officer Linda Brooks. Vice President Emily Carter. I closed my eyes. Emily's name again. Ethan continued speaking. I don't know whether Emily is involved willingly, or whether she's being manipulated. That's an important difference. If she's innocent, she may be in more danger than anyone realizes. I replayed those words 3 times. If she's innocent, until now I had assumed Emily knew everything. But what if she didn't? What if she had signed documents she believed were legitimate? What if Richard had been using her position without telling her the full story? For the first time since the gala, I wasn't just angry, I was uncertain. The next morning, Emily was unusually quiet over breakfast. She barely touched her coffee. Finally she spoke. Richard wants all executives at headquarters tomorrow. For what? She shrugged. They're calling it an emergency strategy meeting. She looked directly at me. I have a strange feeling something bad is about to happen. I studied her face. She wasn't pretending. Whatever was happening inside the company, it was beginning to frighten her too. Just then her phone buzzed. She glanced at the message. The color drained from her face. What is it? I asked. She slowly locked the screen. Nothing. But I knew better. As she walked toward the front door, her phone lit up once more. This time I caught a glimpse of a sender before the screen went dark. Richard Lawson. The preview showed only 6 words. Don't say anything. Trust me. Emily slipped the phone into her purse and hurried out of the house. I stood alone in the kitchen. One question echoed through my mind. What was Richard so desperate to keep hidden? And why was he suddenly warning Emily to stay silent? Whatever was waiting at that emergency meeting. I knew one thing for certain. The answers were getting closer. The emergency meeting. The house felt unusually quiet after Emily left. I stood by the kitchen window, watching her car disappear around the corner. For the first time in 15 years, I wasn't worried about our marriage. I was worried about her safety. Ethan's recording kept replaying in my head. I don't know whether Emily is involved willingly or whether she's being manipulated. Until I knew the truth, I refused to make assumptions. I loved Emily once. Maybe a part of me still did. But love couldn't replace evidence. Only facts could. That afternoon, my phone buzzed. Another message from the unknown number. Board meeting. 2 p.m. Executive headquarters. Something big is happening. No signature. No explanation. I looked at the message for several seconds. There was only one way to find out what was happening. I drove to the company's headquarters. Instead of parking in the main lot, I left my truck across the street at a public parking garage. From there, I had a clear view of the glass front building. Luxury cars arrived one after another. Board members, senior executives, outside investors. Something important was definitely happening. Then I noticed Richard. He stepped out of a black sedan, talking rapidly on his phone. He looked nothing like the confident executive from the gala. His face was tense. His smile was gone. He checked over his shoulder twice before entering the building. A man who had nothing to hide wouldn't behave that way. At exactly 2 o'clock, the board meeting began. I couldn't hear what was being said inside, but I didn't have to. 20 minutes later, employees started gathering near the lobby windows. Whispers spread through the building. People looked confused. Some looked frightened. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered immediately. Hello! A woman's voice whispered. Daniel! Who's this? My name is Linda Brooks. The name hit me instantly. The chief financial officer. One of the 3 names Ethan had mentioned. I don't have much time, she said. They're trying to blame everything on Emily. My heart skipped a beat. What? Richard needs someone to take responsibility. He thinks sacrificing one executive will protect everyone else. I struggled to process what I was hearing. Why are you telling me this? Because Ethan was right. Right about what? Your wife didn't create Falcon. She signed documents she believed were legitimate. Linda's voice trembled. But now Richard is changing records. He's making it look like she approved everything. The room around me suddenly felt smaller. Emily hadn't betrayed me. She had trusted the wrong person. Just as I had. Where are you? I asked. In the records office. I copied evidence. But security is searching the building. Can you get out? I don't know. The line went silent for a moment. Then she spoke again. If anything happens to me, locker C19. Underground parking. The key is taped underneath the fire extinguisher. Before I could respond, the call ended. My heart pounded as I crossed the street. Inside the parking garage, everything was strangely quiet. I found the fire extinguisher exactly where Linda had described. Underneath it, a tiny silver key. Locker C19 stood against the far wall. I unlocked it. Inside was a thick brown envelope, along with a USB drive. Across the front of the envelope, Linda had written one sentence. The original records. Don't let Richard destroy them. I quickly slipped everything into my backpack. Just as the locker door closed, I heard footsteps. Heavy. Fast. 2 security guards entered the garage. One pointed directly toward me. Sir! Stop right there! Without thinking, I turned and ran. I sprinted between parked cars. The guard shouted behind me. One reached for his radio. I pushed through the exit door and disappeared into a crowded shopping plaza next door. Within seconds, I blended into the afternoon crowd. When I finally looked back, the guards were gone. So was my feeling that this was just a workplace dispute. Someone was trying very hard to recover those documents. That evening, I waited until Emily fell asleep before opening the envelope. Inside were dozens of printed emails, signed contracts, financial approvals. Everything was organized by date. One email immediately caught my attention. It was from Richard to Emily. Subject: final approval. Don't worry about reviewing every attachment. Legal has already cleared everything. Just sign so we can meet tomorrow's deadline. Emily's reply was only 4 words. Approved. Thanks, Richard. Another email showed the attachments had been replaced after she signed. My stomach tightened. Richard hadn't just lied. He had manipulated official company records. The evidence was finally starting to fit together. Emily hadn't been the architect of a scheme. She had become its perfect scapegoat. Just then, I heard footsteps upstairs. Emily rushed into the living room. She looked terrified. Daniel, what happened? They've suspended me. She burst into tears. They're accusing me of financial misconduct. I stood up slowly. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I reached into my backpack and placed the brown envelope on the table between us. I said quietly, it's time you saw what Richard has been hiding. Emily stared at the envelope, then back at me. Her hands trembled as she reached for the first document. The truth she was about to read would change both of our lives forever. The truth comes to light. Emily stared at the brown envelope as if it might explode. Her hands trembled. Daniel, where did you get these? I'll explain everything. You need to read them first. She slowly opened the envelope and pulled out the first stack of papers. For several minutes, the room was completely silent. The only sound was the turning of each page. I watched the expression on her face change. Confusion, concern, disbelief, then pure shock. No, she whispered. This can't be right. She grabbed another document, then another. The color drained from her face. I never approved these versions. What do you mean? I asked. I signed the contracts, but these aren't the files I reviewed. She pointed to a paragraph highlighted in yellow. This section wasn't here. She flipped to another page. And this payment amount. It was completely different. Her breathing became uneven. They changed everything after I signed. For the first time since the gala, I believed her. Not because she was my wife, because the evidence supported what she was saying. Emily buried her face in her hands. Oh my God! Richard hadn't simply embarrassed me. He had manipulated Emily. He had used her electronic approvals to authorize altered documents. Whoever had changed those files had made it appear as though Emily had knowingly approved millions of dollars in questionable payments. I've been so stupid, she whispered. No, you were deceived. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. I should have listened to you. I should have questioned him months ago. I trusted him. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. She had trusted Richard. I had trusted Emily. Both of us had placed our faith in the wrong person. I owe you an apology, she said quietly. For the gala. For every warning sign I ignored. For making you feel small. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I was afraid. Richard made everyone believe that disagreeing with him would end our careers. I laughed because she couldn't finish the sentence. I completed it for her. Because you were afraid of becoming the next target. She nodded. I'm ashamed of it. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The damage wasn't magically repaired. Trust doesn't return overnight. But for the first time in weeks, we were standing on the same side. The next morning, we contacted an attorney. Rather than acting impulsively, we followed legal advice. The attorney reviewed the documents and immediately became serious. If these records are authentic, he said, they should be preserved exactly as they are. He advised us not to confront Richard directly and not to alter or distribute the files ourselves. Instead, he helped us prepare copies, document the chain of custody, and identify the appropriate authorities and the company's independent board members who should receive the information. We're going to do this the right way, he said. Emily nodded. So no public accusations? Not without evidence, the attorney replied. The facts must speak for themselves. I appreciated that. After everything that had happened, I wanted the truth, not revenge for its own sake. That afternoon, Emily's phone rang. Richard. She looked at me. I nodded. Put him on speaker. She answered. Hello. Richard's voice was calm. Almost too calm. Emily, don't panic. I've spoken with the board. We can still fix this. Fix what? She asked. The misunderstanding. Emily glanced at me before responding. There isn't a misunderstanding. There was a long pause. Then Richard spoke more carefully. You've always trusted me. I've protected your career. Don't throw that away because of rumors. Emily took a deep breath. I've seen the original records. Silence. Complete silence. When Richard finally spoke again, his confident tone had disappeared. "Where did you get them?" Emily didn't answer. Instead, she calmly said, "If you have anything else to say, please speak to my attorney." She ended the call. A few seconds later, another call came. Then another. Then several messages. None of them were answered. The following week, the company's board announced that an independent review would examine the Falcon project and the approval process surrounding it. Employees were informed that several records had been secured for review and that senior leadership changes could follow depending on the findings. News spread quickly through the office. People who had stayed silent began talking. Employees who had been afraid to speak now agreed to cooperate with the investigation. One by one, the truth started finding its way into the light. Late that evening, Emily and I sat on the back porch. Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, she broke the silence. "I don't expect you to forgive me." I looked out into the darkness. "Forgiveness isn't a switch. It takes time." She nodded. "I know. But whatever happens to us, thank you for believing the evidence instead of your anger." I thought about those words. She was right. Anger had almost controlled me. But evidence had changed everything. And the story wasn't over yet. The investigation had only begun. Somewhere inside those documents was the final piece of the puzzle. The piece that would reveal exactly who created Project Falcon, and why they had gone so far to destroy anyone who got close to the truth. Justice has a way of arriving. 3 weeks passed, long enough for rumors to spread, long enough for lawyers to get involved, long enough for the company's independent investigators to examine every document connected to Project Falcon. But for Emily and me, those 3 weeks felt like 3 years. Every morning we woke up wondering what new headline or phone call might change our lives again. We stayed mostly at home. Friends called. Some offered support. Others wanted gossip. We ignored both. The only thing that mattered now was the truth. One Tuesday afternoon, Emily received an email from the company's board of directors. She opened it with trembling hands. "They've completed the first phase of the investigation." "What does it say?" She kept reading. Then tears filled her eyes. "They've officially cleared me of intentionally approving altered contracts." I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The investigators had confirmed what the evidence showed. Emily had approved one set of documents, but critical attachments had later been replaced through an administrative account she never controlled. She wasn't found blameless for every decision. She was criticized for failing to question unusual approvals, but the board concluded there was no evidence that she knowingly participated in the scheme. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was the truth. And after everything we'd been through, the truth was enough. The board's report didn't stop there. It identified serious failures in internal controls. Several senior executives, including Richard Lawson, were placed on immediate administrative leave while outside authorities reviewed the evidence. The board also announced sweeping reforms to strengthen oversight, document approvals, and financial controls. Employees deserve better. Shareholders deserved better. And no one should ever have to fear speaking up about legitimate concerns. A few days later, my phone rang. It was Ethan. For a second, I just stared at the screen. I answered immediately. "Ethan! Hey, Daniel! You okay?" He laughed softly. "I've been better." He explained that, after losing his job, he'd spoken with investigators and shared everything he knew. "I'm glad you kept those files safe," he said. "You probably saved more than my career." "No," I replied. "You did the brave part." There was a pause. Then he said something I'll never forget. "You know, I almost stayed quiet. I thought nobody would believe me. I almost convinced myself it wasn't my problem. I'm glad you didn't. So am I." Life at home was complicated. Emily and I were living under the same roof again. But trust isn't rebuilt with one apology. It takes honesty, consistency, time. One evening, she placed a small box on the kitchen table. "I found this while cleaning the closet." I opened it. Inside was the old watch I'd given her on our 10th wedding anniversary. She smiled sadly. I stopped wearing it because I got caught up chasing promotions. She looked down. Somewhere along the way, I forgot what success was supposed to mean. I looked at the watch for a long moment. Then I closed the box. Success doesn't matter much if you lose yourself getting there. She nodded. I know that now. A month later, something unexpected arrived in the mail. A formal invitation. The company was holding a town hall meeting to introduce its new leadership team and publicly thank employees who had cooperated with the investigation. Emily looked at the invitation. "I don't think I can go." "You don't have to." She was quiet for a moment. "Will you come with me if I decide to?" I smiled faintly. "This time, we'll walk in together." The town hall felt completely different from the gala. No expensive decorations. No staged laughter. No mocking jokes. Just employees who wanted to move forward. The new interim CEO addressed the audience. He spoke about accountability, transparency, respect. Then he said something that caught everyone by surprise. "There is one more matter we wish to address." He looked toward the audience. Several weeks ago, a guest at a company event was subjected to unacceptable treatment. The room became silent. That behavior did not reflect the values this organization expects from its leaders. He looked directly at me. "Mr. Carter, on behalf of his company, I'm sorry." No applause followed. There didn't need to be any. The apology wasn't meant to create a dramatic moment. It was meant to acknowledge a wrong. And sometimes, that's enough. After the meeting, people approached us. Some apologized for staying silent. Others thanked Ethan for speaking up. No one celebrated. There were no victory speeches, just quiet conversations about doing better. As Emily and I walked toward the parking lot, she slipped her hand into mine. "I don't know what the future looks like." "Neither do I. But whatever happens, I don't ever want fear to make my decisions again." I squeezed her hand gently. "Neither do I." We got into the truck. For the first time in a long while, the road ahead didn't feel uncertain. It felt open, because revenge had never been the answer. The truth was, and in the end, the truth had spoken louder than humiliation ever could. A new beginning. 6 months later, life looked completely different. Not perfect, not effortless, but honest. The investigation into Project Falcon had finally concluded. Independent auditors and the appropriate authorities completed their reviews, and the company's board released its final report. The findings confirmed what the evidence had gradually revealed. The approval process had been manipulated over time, key records had been altered after legitimate reviews, and weaknesses in oversight had allowed misconduct to continue far longer than it should have. Those responsible were removed from their leadership positions, and the company implemented major governance reforms to prevent anything similar from happening again. For the first time in months, the chapter was finally closed. Emily never returned to her old position. Instead, she accepted a role at a smaller consulting firm. The salary wasn't nearly as impressive. The title wasn't as glamorous. But every evening, she came home smiling. One night I asked her, "Do you ever miss the old job?" She thought for a moment. "I miss who I thought I was becoming." She looked around our living room. Then she smiled. "But I don't miss who I actually became." That answer told me she had truly changed. As for me, I stayed exactly where I had always been, at the manufacturing plant, fixing machines, training new employees, living a simple life. The difference was that I had stopped believing simple meant insignificant. One afternoon, my supervisor called me into his office. "I've got some news." I honestly thought I had done something wrong. Instead, he handed me a letter. Inside was an offer for a promotion to operations manager. I stared at him. "Are you serious?" He laughed. "You've earned it. Your work speaks for itself." 4 years, I had measured my worth through someone else's success. Now, for the first time, I was being recognized for my own. A few weeks later, Ethan called. "I found a new job." "That's great." "Actually," he laughed, "it's better than my old one." He had joined another company that valued transparency and ethical reporting. "They hired me because I told the truth," he said. "Funny how life works." "I'm happy for you," I replied. "You deserve it." "So do you." One Saturday morning, Emily and I decided to clean out the garage. Buried beneath an old blanket was a dusty cardboard box. Inside, my father's watch, old family photographs, and one small white card. I picked it up. The place card from the gala. The words were still there. "Idiot trash." Emily saw it in my hand. "I'm so sorry." I looked at the card for a long moment. Then I smiled. Not because it was funny, because it no longer had power over me. I walked to the recycling bin and dropped it inside. Emily watched quietly. That's it. That's it. You don't want to keep it? No. Why? Because I don't need a reminder of the worst night of my life. I'd rather remember what happened after. She slipped her arm around mine. I'm glad you didn't give up on the truth. I looked at her. The truth gave us another chance. That evening we sat on the back porch, watching the sunset. The same porch where months earlier we had wondered whether our marriage would survive. Emily reached for my hand. You know, if that place card had never existed, we might never have discovered what was really happening. She was right. Sometimes life reveals the truth in the cruelest ways. But once the truth is seen, you can never pretend it isn't there. If there's one lesson I learned from everything that happened, it's this. Respect is never something you should sacrifice to keep the peace. Trust should be earned, not assumed. And when someone tries to make you feel small, don't let anger decide your future. Let integrity guide it. Because humiliation may last for a moment, but character lasts a lifetime. As I locked the front door that night, I looked around our home. It wasn't bigger. It wasn't richer. It wasn't more impressive. But it was something it hadn't been for a very long time. Peaceful, real, and built on honesty instead of appearances. The gala that was supposed to break me ended up rebuilding my life. And every time I think about that night, I remember one simple truth. The most powerful revenge isn't humiliation. It's refusing to let someone else's cruelty define who you become. The end.